This is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa, and you are listening to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
Be seen in your dreams.
When I want you in my arms, when I want you, and all your charms, whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream, 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 dream. When I feel blue in the night and I need you to hold me tight, whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream.
Just remember,
I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine, anytime, night or day. The only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so that I could die.
The 80s Slasher Librarian is recorded in front of a living dead audience.
Hey everybody, this is your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian. That little opening bit there was the idea of and done by my 9-year-old daughter Alexis. Say hello, Alexis.
Hello, Alexis.
No, you know, say hi.
Hi.
Okay, guys, and now the next installment of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Perchance to Dream, starting with Chapter 12. A whirling red and blue light washed over the back of the Medilab as an ambulance and 2 fire trucks jockeyed for space on the weed-strewn lot. The main door to the building hung open and streams of revelers poured forth like columns of marching ants, dispersing as quickly as possible before the school officials got there. Uniformed firemen wove their way through the throngs, rolling up a big yellow fire hose and shouting at people to stand back. Ella sat on a low graffiti-covered wall just outside the complex, one arm around Henry, who was staring fixedly at the ambulance. There was a smudge of soot on his forehead, and he was cradling his left hand, which was wrapped in a bandage. Jen and Dimitri sat a short distance from them, looking grim, too shell-shocked to even speak. Nicky was dead. A police car crunched up the gravel drive and pulled to a halt alongside them, weeds rattling against its grill. A tired-looking officer got out. Ella recognized him from the police station as being Officer Goodman. She squeezed Henry's shoulders, then got up and walked over to greet him. She was trembling with emotion and exhaustion, but made an attempt to be friendly. "So, they put you on night duty now?" Officer Goodman nodded. "Sweethearts that they are." He glanced briefly at the assembled crowd, then watched as a covered gurney was slowly loaded into the back of the ambulance. "Jesus, what happened out here?" She just died," said Henry. His voice sounded small and tight. He looked up at them, his eyes haunted. "We were dancing, and one minute, she was fine, and then—" He waved a hand vaguely. "How did she die, son?" Henry shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." Henry covered his mouth with his hand and blew through it, trying to gather his thoughts. She caught on fire." He gave a little giggle, then choked back a sob. "But I didn't do it. I swear, I tried to put the flames out, but I couldn't." He looked down at the bandage on his hand, fiddling with the loose end. "How could that even happen?" Officer Goodman stared at him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You're sure she didn't brush against anything? A cigarette, maybe? Those modern fabrics, they're—" No, nothing like that." Henry shook his head again, as though irritated by the question. He looked up at Officer Goodman, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Can I go home now?" "No, sorry. We'll need to get a statement from you all." A shout went up from one of the firemen, and Officer Goodman waved sharply at them, then drew a hand across his throat. "Sit tight, kids. I have to go see this. See you in 5. Officer Goodman strode briskly toward the waiting fire truck. Ella put a comforting hand on Henry's shoulder. He hung his head, tears shining in his brown eyes. I tried to save her. I tried to put the fire out. It wasn't your fault, sweetie. You did all that you could. I know. Henry picked fitfully at the burn holes in his blue jeans. Then he looked over at Officer Goodman, who was talking intimately to the fire chief, glancing over at him from time to time with a dark look on his face. He thinks I did it, doesn't he? He thinks I killed Nicky. Nobody thinks that. There were witnesses. You saw what happened, right, Ella? I saw something. Ella shifted uncomfortably. She rubbed her hands together, trying to warm up. The chill night breeze gusted through her thin party top, and she sincerely wished she'd brought a jacket with her. The question is, Henry, what did you see? Henry shrugged casually. Well, I could have sworn that we were in some kind of Victorian costume drama, and you were in a ball dress, and I was dancing some kind of frilly old person dance with Nicky. Then next thing I know, she's just on fire. Henry cleared his throat, wiping his eyes. So tell me, sailor, which way's the loony bin? Ella scuffed a foot on the ground. We could look it up on MapQuest together. She raised her eyes to his and held his gaze for a moment. You saw it too? I saw it. I lived it. The freaking corset nearly killed me. Ella's eyes flashed in the night. Henry, what in the name of sweet holy fuck just happened? I don't know, but I don't think holy's got anything to do with it. Henry stared at her for a moment. Then his eyes lit up and he snapped his fingers. Freddy! Huh? She said Freddy. Before she died, I was trying to put the flames out, and she just looked right through me and said his name. She sounded so scared. Ella felt goosebumps break out all over her body. Are you sure? I'm positive. Freddy, as in Matt's Freddy? Jen walked over to join them. Dunno, that's all she said. Ella stood up excitedly. I met a boy upstairs tonight who was talking about Freddy too. He said that Freddy was trying to kill him. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people called Freddy, Jen started to say. Bit of a coincidence, don't you think? Well, let's break out the Uzis and go take this mad killer down. Dimitri stood up, his expression quizzical. Dunno about you, but I'm convinced. Henry's eyes blazed with sudden fury. You want to help, pretty boy? Then how about you shut the fuck up? Nicky just died, in case you didn't notice. He glared at Dimitri. But why would you notice a little thing like that? Unless there was a video link in the broom closet we found you both in. Shorts around your ankles. How about both of you just shut the fuck up? Jen glared at Henry, then turned back to Ella. Listen, this could look really bad for me. Matt's still missing, and I don't want the cops to come sniffing around. Where did you say you last saw that boy? He was upstairs, but then he vanished. He could be anywhere. Ella shook her head helplessly. And why would the cops come after you? Would you know him if you saw him? Probably, but then how about we go find him instead of standing around here bickering like a bunch of old women? Maybe he can give us some answers, don't you think? Jen swung around in a swirl of hair and started walking back toward the Medilab. After a moment, Dimitri ran after her, throwing a black look back at Henry, who gave him the finger. Well, that was real mature. Ella glared at Henry, but when she saw his expression, her face softened. Are you going to be okay? She asked in a gentler tone of voice. Henry took a deep breath, then turned to face the dark shell of the gutted building. Let's go find out, he said. The inside of the Medilab seemed smaller now that it was empty. Ella led the others across the deserted dance floor, shards of light from the disco glitter balls spinning silently over them. Together they climbed up the metal stairwell onto the gantry and quickly located the door. Ella hesitated before walking through into the darkness, but Jen pulled a lighter out of her bag and cracked it open. After a short walk, they found themselves in the ruined main lab. Wind gusted through the broken window at the far end, and the red light gave the room an ominous atmosphere. So, where's this boy, Sherlock? Asked Jen, glancing dubiously around at the wrecked room. He was here, but he left through that door. What? So why'd you come back up here? I was hoping he'd come back. I followed him out the door, but he didn't come out the same place I did. Ella glanced around the devastated room. I thought there might be some kind of turn in the corridor that I missed or something. It was just one corridor, girlie. Jen clicked off her lighter, saving the fuel. Hey, maybe he was a ghost. It's been a good night for it. You're all kinds of funny, you know that, but ghosts don't bleed. Henry pointed to the sink. Smudges of dark blood were still visible on the taps. Dmitri peered over her shoulder and made a dismissive noise. He ain't here. He probably took off with the other losers. He glanced at Henry pointedly, then waved a hand at the door. Hey, there are 2 doors here. Which one should we pick? Henry shrugged. Which one is your favorite door, asshole? Oh, I don't know. Which one is your favorite finger? Such wit, coming from such a jock. Henry slung his jacket over his shoulder and started heading back toward the first door. Come on, let's go back out the way we came. If he's out there, we'll find him. Guys! Jen was staring at the floor, a weird look on her face. I think this might have been a bad idea. Ella looked down. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw a dark crack running the length of the room, bisecting the floor. Faint orange light was just visible on the other side. An ominous creaking sound filled the air, like the sound of a ship's timbers flexing in the breeze. Oh, she said. That doesn't look very good. Then the floor fell in. Jacob ducked out from behind a car in the parking lot of the Stray Cat and regarded the building warily. He had been there for well over 20 minutes, and so far he hadn't seen anything to indicate he was being watched. No security guards, no helicopters on the skyline, and best of all, no cops. The building in front of him was shabby and dimly lit, with colored lights in the window and tatty billboard posters on the door. 3 Harley motorcycles were parked out in the weedy front lot, red flames painted on their gas tanks, and a couple of burnt-out T-birds lurked by the entrance. Hanging above them, a large faded sign showed a silhouette of a buxom woman kneeling on all fours, the pink letters beneath it proclaiming, World's Most Beautiful Women. Jacob gave a wry smile. So the world's most beautiful girls had decided to come here to Springwood? To work the graveyard shift in some trashy low-rent strip joint? Yeah, that was likely. After another couple of cautious surveillance minutes, Jacob plucked up his courage, hoisted his stolen pants up a little higher around his waist, and set off with big strides across the concrete, toward the front door. He only hoped that he looked more confident than he felt. Inside was even darker, if that was even possible. Jacob squinted around him in the gloom, getting used to the low light. A couple of fruit machines flashed and spun by the door, and the mirrored wall behind the bar reflected its only patrons, 3 surly-looking bikers nursing root beers. Billiard balls clinked sedately as 2 strippers on their lunch break shared a cigarette and a laugh over the pool table. Up on the stage, a bored-looking young Asian girl in a bright pink bikini gyrated and spun half-heartedly around a brass pole, her eyes fixed firmly to the TV at the back of the room, which was tuned to some late-night 70s martial arts flick. Jacob slipped into one of the bright red, wiped-clean plastic booths at the side of the room and played with the cocktail menu. He had no money to buy a drink. He tried not to make eye contact with the other patrons and did his best to ignore the girl up on the stage, beyond the occasional furtive glance. He hadn't seen a girl that naked in over 5 years, and now was not the time to catch up. He was just reaching into his pocket to see if the previous owner of his jacket had left any money in the lining, when the door behind him swung open violently, rebounding off its springs with a loud crump. Alarmed, Jacob rose to his feet, his eyes darting around the room for a possible escape route. Then he sank back down in relief at the sight of Kane, striding across the room toward him, dressed casually in black jeans and a gray polo sweatshirt, his long black hair swept up in a ponytail. Kane threw himself into the seat opposite Jacob and studied the cocktail menu with great enthusiasm, then raised an arm and signaled the waitress. "Diane, the usual," he cried. After a moment, all eyes turned away from him and back to the stage. This was not the kind of place where it did your health good to stare. Kane put both hands on the table and beamed at Jacob. "Glad you could make it, kiddo." Jacob did not smile. Instead, he opened his jacket to reveal a gun. Cain froze, but Jacob merely pulled it out and slid it along the booth seat, under cover of the darkness. "Is this yours?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. Cain looked down at the gun thoughtfully, then reached out to pick it up. He checked that the safety catch was on, then tucked it away safely inside his own jacket. "Let me explain," he said. "I don't want to hear it." Jacob glanced up at the barmaid, making sure her back was still turned, then leaned forward, his eyes flashing in the darkness. "You set me up, you bastard!" "I did that, boy, but for a good reason." "I killed 3 more people tonight, and it's your fault," Jacob hissed. Across the room, one of the bikers glanced up sharply, then turned firmly away with a scrape of his chair. Cain waved a hand impatiently. "Read the papers, kid. People die every day. There's always another sucker willing to die for a good cause. You have to look to the bigger picture." "And what exactly is the bigger picture?" "Killing Freddy." A muscle in Jacob's jaw twitched. "Keep talking," he said eventually. Cain sat forward, his face alight with excitement. "You think I was assigned to your case at random? Please, I knew about Freddy from the beginning." "You're shitting me." "I'm serious. Before I came to Weston, I used to work up at the police station, and I saw everything." Cain paused, watching the Asian girl's stage-bound gyrations with a faraway look on his face. "They swore me to secrecy, of course. When those teens started dying, I had to deal with their paperwork. There was so much paperwork. Well, paperwork that the shredder had a hard time dealing with at all." "Your drink, sir?" A pretty waitress slid a jug of beer in front of him. "Thanks, Diane. Keep the change." "So anyway," Cain leaned forward, dropping his voice. "I saw what was happening. How the cops tried to cover the whole deal up. How they wiped out Kruger's records, blacked out the news files in the library, locked up any kid who started having the dreams." He leaned forward, his eyes sparkling. "I saw everything." "So what's that got to do with me?" "You saw him last night, right?" There was only the slightest hesitation. "Right." "Even though they gave you the hypnosil to stop your dreams." "Right. I figure he found a way to get around the hypnosil. It's kind of freaking me the fuck out, Cain." Cain nodded briskly, trying not to smile. "We have to move fast then," he said. "Kruger is smart, but we can beat him together." "How?" "Jacob, my boy, I think you know how." Cain looked up at him, his eyes bright with curiosity. "How are you doing it? Stopping everyone from dreaming?" Jacob was silent for a long moment. Then he stirred and reached up to rub his eyes. "You've read my files, right?" "All 18 boxes of them." Cain shook his head. "You're amazing. If we could just channel that power you have into—" "I'd be dead," Jacob said bluntly. "I'd have died of boredom while your guys wrote reports and prodded me with needles and filled in paperwork and got me guest spots on Oprah and CNN. Fuck that shit. I'm through with it all. It's no fun being Billy the Wonder Kid when no one gives you ice cream." Cain nodded, raising his eyebrows encouragingly. "It wasn't my fault," Jacob went on, sounding defensive. "I had to do it. Before they locked me up, fed me the hypnosil, Freddy would come to me every day, boasting and bragging about he's going to kill everyone in the whole town, and then there'll be nobody left but me and him. I couldn't stand it." "So you decided to cut off his pathway into our world." Jacob nodded. "It's just one town after all. It's taken me this long, but now I've finally got it cracked. It's like I'm seeing the town from space in my head and just locking down on people's dreams with my mind." He waved his hands around to illustrate. "I have no idea how it really works, but once I'd figured it out, I knew it was the only way to keep him contained." "How long can you keep doing this?" Jacob shrugged. "As long as I need to. At first it was hard, but now it's like breathing. I don't even know that I'm doing it." "What if something happens to you?" Jacob shrugged. "Long as I'm here, he can't be here too. That's all I want. He killed my dad. I owe it to him. If I prevent one more death, it'll be worth it, right?" "But now that Freddy found a way around the hypnosil," Cain left his words dangling. Jacob swallowed the bait. He looked up at Cain with genuine fear in his eyes. "I'm screwed, right?" "Not necessarily. That's where I come in." Kane reached into his bag and tossed a box onto the table, inwardly rejoicing. This kid was so fucking stupid. Jacob picked up the bag. After a brief hesitation, he peered inside, then looked up at Kane with a question on his face. "It's a death stone," said Kane. "Southern Maori tribes use them. It's supposed to capture the soul of a dead person and hold it in limbo, until it can be transferred into the body of a newborn. They believe their loved ones can be returned to them in this way." "So what's that have to do with Freddy?" Kane's gaze darkened. "Freddy is a soul confined to his own particular kind of limbo. He died violently, and now he can't rest until he's avenged his own death." Kane shrugged. "Trouble is, no one person killed him. Over 40 people were involved in the death of Fred Krueger. The Maori have a name for an entity like him. A Stocksby. An angry spirit. These spirits will stop at nothing to wreak misery and pain on those who killed them. Or on their families. That's why the kids started dying, you see." Kane took a reflective sip of his drink and gazed thoughtfully into the glass. "Of course, that could all be bullshit, but you never know. Hold on a moment." He rummaged in his jean pockets, then stood up and tucked a $5 bill into the pink bra of the Asian girl, who was making the rounds off the tables. She gave him a wide smile that did nothing to hide the distaste in her eyes, before heading toward the back room with the flounce and a wobble of stilettos. Piped music came on, a bass-heavy Rob Zombie song, and the curtain swung closed. Kane sat back in his seat, rubbing at his temples. "So," he said, "Freddy killed all the children of the people who murdered him. But he's still here. He still can't rest. Since the cops intervened with their hypnosil, he's had no outlet for all the rage. And with you stopping everyone's dreams, he's completely cut off from all his fun toys." He picked up his drink. "Nobody's dreaming, unless, of course, he found out a way to kill people in their daydreams." Kane gave a little laugh, then paused and looked at Jacob hard. "He couldn't do that, right?" "Not that I know of." Jacob stared off into space for a moment, looking worried. "So, in the meantime, he's directing all his attention onto you. That's a lot of dream energy you're holding back there. Perhaps he's drawing on that to get around the hypnosil." Jacob sat back in his seat, his eyes flitting nervously around the room. "Interesting theory," he said. Kane regarded Jacob coolly. "You know any different?" he asked. "Maybe," said Jacob, "but go on." Kane leaned across the table and took the box from Jacob. He pulled out the blood-colored death stone and buffed it on his sleeve. It shone red in the dim light, seeming to glow from within. "This little cutie's going to help us, both of us. If what I've read is right, we can use it to catch Freddy. Then you can let the town dream again. Take all that weight off your shoulders." "And I do what exactly?" "All you've got to do is summon him, and then I'll do the rest. A little bit of hoocha hoocha, and his soul will be trapped in here, stripping him of his powers. And that will be that." Kane leaned forward, smiling winningly. "Just think about it, kid. We could do away with Freddy for good." "What's all this we business, Kane?" "Come on now, boy. Don't be like that. We're on the same team, you and I. We both want the same thing. Freddy gone. The town saved. Kids dreaming without worrying about getting liquidized in their beds. And it's all in your hands, Jacob." Jacob sat still for a long time. Then he rubbed a hand over his eyes. "So where do we start?" he asked. Kane smiled. "That's my boy." 4 streets away, the back lot of the Springwood police station was almost empty. Almost. A large black van was parked up by the back wall, almost invisible in the darkness. Its license plates were conspicuously missing, and a curtain was hung over the front windscreen. From time to time it would rock slightly, and if you listened very, very carefully, you could hear what sounded like a woman's voice coming from inside, yelling for her lawyer. Then everything went quiet. A short while later, the back doors swung open, spilling a wash of yellow light out into the night. A dark figure was thrown out of the back, spinning to the ground in a tangle of flailing limbs and swirling auburn hair. A briefcase followed next, its contents spilling out and littering the sidewalk with a shower of flying paper. The back door slammed and the van gunned off into the night. Dr. Sally Spencer raised herself up on one elbow, rubbing at her bruised wrists. "Well," she said to no one in particular, "that was entertaining." Chapter 13. Ella woke up in a red-tinged darkness. She shifted on the ground, groaning. Her head throbbed with a sharp stabbing pain, and a soft moan escaped from her lips as she shifted her position. Everything hurt, and her cheekbone ached from where her head had hit the ground. She rolled over, struggling to focus in the gloom. Above her was a high metal ceiling, barely visible in the dim red light. A rusty tangle of copper pipes snaked their way across it, throwing long shadows across the walls. The room faded into darkness at the far end, the shadows seemingly impenetrable. A frown knit Ella's brow. Where was this place? Slowly she rolled onto her side, wincing as her bruised cheekbone stabbed at her, then carefully levered herself up into a sitting position. The movement caused a fresh rush of black static to fill her head, and she flung out a hand to support herself on the ground, feeling like she was going to throw up. The floor was sticky, and after a moment her dizziness passed, and she drew her hands back into her lap, wiping them convulsively on her jeans. Blood. Her exploring fingers touched a cut on her forehead, and there was a small pool of it on the floor where she had been lying. She wiped the worst of it off and looked around warily, then clambered to her feet. The throbbing in her head subsided slightly, and she took a few deep breaths to clear her mind as she looked around, searching for signs of life. She seemed to be in some kind of underground lab, full of pipes and wrecked, burnt-out machinery. The walls were lined with blackened cages, and the air was uncomfortably warm. There was no sign of the others. Ella started walking, her footsteps ringing on the metal floor. She drew level with the first of the cages and peered inside, curious. A moment later she recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth. The cage was full of the bodies of lab rats, their twisted remains blackened and flash-welded to the metal bars by the heat of the blaze. Their fur was burnt off, vaporized by the extreme temperatures, and dried blood gleamed dully on their charred, naked bodies. The rats stared at her with hollow black eyes, teeth bared as if to challenge a death they could not escape. Jeez! Ella's gaze flitted fearfully over the nearby cages. Now that her eyes were getting used to the low light, she could see that they were also occupied. Dead black shapes hunched obscenely on the floor. Sickened, she moved on. A movement in one of the larger cages caught her eye. It was followed by a muffled scraping. Ella hesitated, curiosity warring with her revulsion. Cautiously, she knelt down in front of the cage and peered in. In the dim light, she could see the back half of a small, shaggy-haired puppy protruding from a pile of wood shavings. Its tail wagged enthusiastically as it dug around, snuffling quietly. "Oh!" Ella's heart swelled, and she leaned forward and quickly opened the latch, a soft smile on her face. She reached into the cage and ran her hand over the little creature's rump, stroking its fur. The puppy yipped at her touch, then started to back out, kicking itself free of the shavings. Ella leaned in further, reaching out to help it. "You poor little scrap. Did they leave you here all by yourself? That's no fun for a pretty little doggy like—" "Holy shit!" Ella stared, her mouth open in horror. The puppy looked up at her, panting happily. But there was something very wrong. The creature's entire front half was burnt to a crisp. Its ears were gone, and the flesh had melted off one side of its face, bone gleaming whitely through the matted mess of its fur. Skin hung down in shredded strands along its flank, revealing bloody internal organs and a tiny white rib cage. Ella jumped back in horror as the dead puppy scampered toward her with a clatter of claws, its blackened tongue lolling happily out of its mouth. It didn't seem to be in any kind of pain. Tiny teeth met in death's head grin, and the creature danced in a joyous little circle, begging to be picked up. Ella stared at it. "That," she said, "is so wrong." A loud bang behind her made her start. The echoes bounced around the room, metallic overtones hanging in the air. Ella glanced around in fear to see a door open on the other side of the room, muted red light spilling out of it and drenching the air. Beneath her, the puppy yapped excitedly, then took off across the room like a rocket, a blur of flying legs and burnt fur. Ella stood up awkwardly, dusting her hands off. She shaded her eyes and peered through the door. 4 shapes were visible, silhouetted against the light. 4 young girls playing in the ashes of the room. 2 of them held a jump rope between them, while a third jumped over it, her dress held up primly to avoid dirtying it on the cinders. A 4th girl stood behind them, patiently waiting her turn. They were all barefoot and wore old-fashioned cotton dresses and bonnets, their sun-bleached hair flying around them as they skipped and jumped, chattering cheerily amongst themselves. Ella watched as the puppy scampered up to the 4th girl and gave a flying jump upwards, launching itself into her arms. She caught it expertly and swung it around, laughing delightedly, as it started yipping and licking her face with wet swipes of its tongue. She didn't seem in the slightest bit bothered by the way it looked. Plucking up her courage, Ella walked through the door and approached them. As she drew near, the 4th girl turned and looked up at her. She had brown hair tied up in bunches with red ribbon. Her laughter died away, and she cradled the puppy protectively against her chest as she stared at Ella, an accusing look in her eyes. Then she turned her back and made her way over to the others, taking her place between them. She gave the puppy to the 3rd girl, who took it with a cry of delight and kissed it on its nose. She began to jump, easily keeping pace with the wide swings of the rope. The girls began chanting a playground ditty, their voices thin and insubstantial in the dusty atmosphere.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door.
The hair stood up on the back of Ella's neck. A feeling of foreboding filled her. She watched the little girls as they continued their game, their chanting growing in volume.
5, 6, grab a crucifix.
A light wind rose in the room. A few sheets of newspaper fluttered past them, vanishing into the shadows. Ella glanced behind her nervously.
7, 8, better stay up late.
The puppy's head swiveled toward Ella. In an instant, its expression changed, the matted fur on its back rising, its bloodshot eyes narrowing. It growled at her low in its throat.
9, 10, never sleep again. Ah, he's here!
The rope hit the ground, throwing up a cloud of ash. A flash of red light burst through the cloud, revealing the 4 figures of the girls in its smoky, translucent interior. They stopped skipping and stared back at Ella, unmoving, the rope hanging limply between them. Ella held her breath. The girls' faces were skeletal inside their creamy white bonnets, their eye sockets empty. Blood soaked through their dresses in a rich flood, and their bare-boned feet clicked on the metal floor. An instant later, the light faded, and the girls' bodies crumbled to the floor, disintegrating in a puff of hot ash. The wind ruffled through the piles of empty clothes left behind. Then all was still again. Amid the cinders, the puppy howled. "Wanna play with me?" Ella jumped and spun around, her heart almost exploding inside her chest. A tall, wiry man stood directly behind her, arms folded, leaning casually against a pillar as though waiting for a date. His face was in deep shadow, partially concealed by the battered hat he wore. The janitor, perhaps? Ella clutched her chest in relief. "Geez, you scared me. You shouldn't just creep up on a gal like—" Her voice died away in her throat, and she stared down at the man's hand. He was wearing a soiled gardening glove with knives fixed to it, like long silver claws. Her eyes flew to the guy's face, and she recoiled in shock. His features were burned and twisted, and his skin was charred to a crisp, like a pizza that had been left in the oven too long. Ella's mouth fell open. "This has to be a dream," she told herself. "I fell and hit my head. I have to wake up." The man smiled, revealing rotting needle-like teeth. "You're not dreaming, Ella. You can't wake up. This is real." Ella shook her head, still staring at the man's face. "No way." She pointed a shaking finger. "Look at you, at all those burns. They aren't real. They can't be. If they were, you'd be dead or in extreme pain." "Whoever said I was alive?" The man glowered at her, his yellow eyes flashing. "Someone's not paying any attention." With that, he slammed his knife glove back against a nearby pillar. Metal squealed, and a large chunk of the pillar fell away. Ella's jaw dropped. The man lifted his hand again. Ella jumped back, but he merely raised a charred eyebrow at her. "Check this out," he said, his voice a guttural whisper. He held up his other hand out in front of his face and winked at Ella. Then he slashed downward with his blades. His arm fell to the ground with a wet thunk, severed at the elbow. The man grinned, waving the stump at Ella. Greenish-black blood spurted. "Pretty cool, huh?" Ella stared at the burnt madman who had just cut his own arm off. Her mouth opened and closed a couple of times, but no sound came out. "Look, I can write my name." His voice was sing-song. He turned and directed the spurting blood onto the rusted iron floor, sweeping his arm up and down to form the letters FK. Then he looked up, and his expression darkened. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" "Away!" Ella threw the word over her shoulders as she sprinted for the stairs at the end of the room. She reached the first step and started climbing, then gave a yell as her feet suddenly left the ground. Slowly, dreamily, she started floating upwards. Ella's feet pedaled in empty air for a couple of seconds. Then she flung out a hand and grabbed hold of the stairs. "Ooh, someone drink some of the fizzy lifting drink." She pulled with all of her might, fighting against the unseen force that was dragging her off her feet. Then she yelped as the rail suddenly started to heat up, flexing and writhing slowly under her hands. Ella looked down and found that she was holding on to the tail of a giant silver serpent. Its head hissed at her, glaring through slitted purple eyes. Ella goggled. In the background, the madman laughed. "Come to Daddy!" With a jerk, Ella's grip was pulled free. Kicking and flailing, she sailed backward through the air, yelling in fear. She had always dreamed of flying, but not like this. She floated back across the room and hung suspended in front of him. The air around her hummed, crackling with invisible energy. Then the energy cut out, dropping her 6 feet to the ground. She landed with a bruising clang on the metal floor. The man smirked. "Oops!" Ella rolled over, wincing at the pain that flared in her ribs. "Who the hell are you?" "Who do you want me to be, honey?" The name came to Ella's mind unbidden. You're Freddy, aren't you?" He clapped his hands slowly, applauding her. "Freddy Krueger, to be precise. Now!" He dropped his hands to his side and breathed deeply, looking Ella over with relish as though she were a prime rib steak at a restaurant. "Let's get down to business!" With a flash, he reached down and grabbed Ella by the hair. He hauled her to her feet, easily swaying aside as she lashed out at him, then held her tightly against his chest, cupping her chin with his free hand, getting her in a headlock. Ella slammed her elbow backward, connecting sharply with his chest, but the madman didn't so much as flinch. Freddy buried his nose in Ella's hair and breathed in deeply. "Ugh, I just love the smell of fear in the morning. Really gets the old blood a-pumping. Know what I mean?" "My friends are down here," Ella said, struggling to break free. "One word from me, they'll kick your ass." "I'd like to see them try," Freddy growled. "Look up!" Despite herself, Ella glanced suspiciously upward. Her head reeled. Henry, Jen, and Dimitri were suspended from the ceiling above her, high up in the rafters. They were bound with thick, rusted chains and gagged with silver duct tape. They hung there limply, unmoving. Ella couldn't tell if they were alive or dead. "You bastard! Let them go!" she cried, punctuating each word with a jab of her elbow into Kruger's rotting ribs. "No!" Freddy said. He grinned down at her, savoring her fear, then shifted his grip and made a sharp gesture with his free hand. Beside them, part of the wall fell away in a tumble of bricks to reveal a roaring furnace. 6-foot flames shot out, licking hungrily against the edges of the hole. Ella flinched, turning her head away from the sudden blast of heat, then turned back and squinted warily into the flames. Something was moving inside the furnace. She stared at it for a moment, then gasped in recognition. It was Matt. Or rather, it was a white light in the shape of Matt. It was moving, trying to swim through the flames toward her, as if the fire were nothing but choppy water. Its mouth was open in a soundless scream of anguish. The word ghost slammed into Ella's head, but she quickly banished it. She didn't believe in such things. Ella's voice was a whisper. What is that? Oh, come on. Don't you recognize your little play pal? Matt, oh my God. Inside the furnace, the figure reached out toward her, imploringly. She caught the sound of its voice, tiny and far away, like a faint signal coming through a TV set tuned to static. Ella! Ella! Please! You gotta help me! Freddy waved his hand impatiently. A barred metal grate slammed down, sealing off the furnace. Then he released his hold on Ella's hair and gave her a hard shove, sending her spinning to the floor. Ella rolled over and stared up at Freddy with hate in her eyes. You killed him! Freddy shrugged a shoulder, looking modest. Killed? It's such a strong word. You bastard! Ella jumped to her feet and launched herself at him. The air buzzed and Freddy vanished, leaving Ella to collide headfirst with the pillar behind him. She reeled away, clutching her forehead. Disembodied laughter echoed in her ear. Round and round we go! I'm too fast! You're too... A hand smacked her on the back of the head, bouncing her face off the pillar. Fucking stupid! Ha ha ha! Ella wiped the blood out of her eyes and gritted her teeth. She backed up a couple of steps, glaring around her at the empty air. What do you want? She said, her voice a low growl almost matching the killer's own. Freddy blinked back into existence in a hum of superheated air, like an ugly decaying tooth fairy. I've got a little job for you. He eyed the blood on her face, all traces of humor gone. I need you to kill for me. Me? Ella backed away, placing a good distance between the two of them. Why do you need me? You're the one with the whatever the hell those things are. Ella gestured weakly toward Freddy's knife glove. Hey, I'm the one asking the questions, bitch. Freddy spat. He flexed his finger knives ominously, cracking the joints in his steel-plated gloves, then made a sharp gesture toward the ceiling. Above them, chains rattled in the gloom. There was a muffled yelp, and a second later, Dmitri plummeted downward in a cloud of ash, stopping a bare 3 feet above the ground, spinning on the end of a long chain. As the dust settled, he unwrapped his hands from around his head and stared fearfully up at them. He was battered and bruised, but alive. Dmitri, breathed Ella. She gazed down at him, her heart in her mouth. Even wrapped in his chains and covered in soot, he was still gorgeous. Oh, Dmitri, mocked Freddy. Yeah, right. Why don't you tell Dmitri exactly why you're about to get him killed? 10 words or less, please. I haven't got all day. Don't you dare. Ella ran forward and made a grab for him, but Freddy gave a contemptuous flick of his wrists, hooting with mirth, sending Dmitri hurtling back up into the air out of reach. Ella jumped for him, then whirled and glared at Freddy. Damn you, let him go! Let me see. Freddy pressed the tip of a finger knife to his lips, as though considering his options. How about... No! He rounded on Ella, his eyes flashing. Now listen close. There's a boy I need dead. Kill him for me, and I'll let your pathetic little friends go free. Refuse, and... Freddy jerked his head toward Dmitri. The grate fell away, revealing the furnace. Dmitri started to float toward the open grate, struggling mutely as he glided through the air toward the flames. No! Ella tried to grab at Dmitri, but she couldn't reach him. She could feel the heat from the furnace on the side of her face. Dmitri gave a muffled cry of terror. Freddy leaned back against the wall idly, inspecting his finger knives. Take your time, Ella. This is an important decision. What the hell's wrong with you? Cried Ella. I can't kill someone. Freddy hissed under his breath. Wrong answer! He blinked toward the furnace and the flames shot up higher. A moment later, Dmitri sailed past him and disappeared feet first into the fire. No! Ella ran toward the furnace and stared, horrified. She could just see Dmitri kicking and struggling inside, flames licking around him. His tape bandage burned off, and he began shrieking, fighting to free himself. Ella darted toward, then stopped, shielding her face, driven back by the intense heat. A long, terrible moment later, Dimitri's cries stopped. A ringing silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackle and pop of the flames. "The boy's name is Jacob," said Freddy calmly. "Do you want me to write that down for you?" Ella turned to face Freddy, her blue eyes blazing with rage. "You killed Dimitri?" Freddy feigned shock. "Really? I must have missed that one." Then his smile faded, and he struck out with an ungloved hand, sending Ella reeling face first to the floor. Before she could right herself, he strode forward and bent over, grabbing her ankles and yanking her backward. She yelled and kicked out at him, catching him a glancing blow on the side of the head. But Freddy just laughed and grabbed her forearm, spinning her around onto her back. He knelt over her and sliced down with his fingerknives, slashing open her top, then raked his blades over her exposed skin. Ella cried out in pain and bucked beneath him, trying to throw him off, but he was far too heavy. He slashed at her again and again, laughing delightedly. Summoning up the last of her strength, Ella braced herself on the floor and twisted her whole body beneath him, throwing the crazed killer off balance. Freddy pitched sideways and Ella shoved at him again, then rolled out from under him and stumbled to her feet with a shout of triumph. She stood glaring down at him as he knelt on the floor in front of her, her hair wild, blood dripping down her top. Then the pain hit her and she clutched at her stomach, then pulled her bloodied hands away, staring down at herself. The word Jacob had been sliced crudely into the skin of her belly, outlined in 1-inch-high letters of torn flesh. Freddy got to his feet, giggling to himself. "Think you'll remember now?" "I'm gonna kill you!" Freddy laughed, tipping his battered hat. "Been there, done that. Give me something original." In a flash, he reached out, quick as a snake, and grabbed her by the throat. "This boy, I need him out of the picture, and quick. How you do it is up to you." He tightened his grip and Ella began to choke. "Help me or die. Your call." "Why?" Ella coughed, tearing at the hand around her throat. "Why me?" "Because." Freddy smiled an evil smile and tapped the side of his nose. "You're a good little girl. You'll do as you're told. The others, they lack the imagination." He glanced up at the rafters where Henry and Jen hung, imprisoned, and grunted. "This little shit Jacob's been bugging the shit out of me for far too long. He needs to die. He's stopping their dreams. He's stopping me, damn it!" Freddy's ugly features contorted into a rictus of hate. "No one fucks with Freddy and gets to live!" Ella pulled his rotting fingers back from her throat, just enough to breathe. A memory slammed into her head. Now that her shock at Dimitri's death had subsided a little, she finally registered the name carved onto her belly. Jacob, the boy she'd met at the party, the boy who said that Freddy was trying to kill him. Ella felt cold and hollow inside. Dimitri was dead. "Why don't you kill him yourself?" she said hoarsely. "I can't. He knows me. He's always ready." Freddy reached out, a glinting steel talon, and ran the tip idly down Ella's jawline. "But you can get through to him. He won't suspect a thing." "But I can't." Freddy pulled an expression of disapproval, then glanced up and nodded his head. "No, please!" Too late. Chains rattled and Henry dropped down from the ceiling with a yelp, spinning on the end of his chain. Freddy cocked an eyebrow at the dangling boy, and his lips drew back into a sneer. "You got 10 seconds, sweetheart. 10, 9... Henry made a frantic muffled sound, hanging upside down, as he started to float slowly toward the furnace. He'd seen what had happened to Dimitri. He jerked around in the air, desperately trying to pull his hands free of the chains that bound him. "You let him go!" Ella pulled helplessly at Freddy's hand round her throat, then kicked out at him. He swayed backward, easily avoiding her wild blows, then shoved her to the ground with such force that she flew back a good 10 feet before hitting the metal floor. Her head cracked against a rusted iron pipe, and stars danced in front of her eyes. 8, 7... "Okay, fine." Ella lifted her head, coughing, dazed. I'll do it.
You're lying, Ella. 6, 5.
I'm not lying. I'll do it. I promise.
Ah, enough already. I'm bored with this shit.
Freddy yawned and waved his knife glove. The air buzzed and Henry shot toward the fire. Okay, this has been chapters 12 and 13 of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Perchance to Dream. I gotta say, this was some action-packed couple of chapters. Lots of Freddy stuff tonight. I gotta say, Natasha Rhodes is a hell of a Freddy author. She knows how to write Freddy, knows how to write Freddy's dreamscape, knows how to make the dreams flow. I love it. I think I may have accidentally called her Krista Foss last night. That was a mistake. The author's name is Natasha Rhodes. Anyways, guys, I'll be back tomorrow with some more of this book. I hate leaving it off right there, but that was the end of chapter 13. But we've got a main character's life hanging in the balance, literally hanging in the balance, until tomorrow when I come back with another couple chapters of this great book. Before I go, I want to thank my daughter Alexis, not just for her funny little idea at the beginning of the video, but also for doing a good job being a creepy, jump-roping little girl doing the Freddy nursery rhyme. Say bye, Lexi.
Bye.
Anyways, guys, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and
I'll be seeing you in your dreams.
Be seen